Hey there, Squirrel Army! Today we're discussing how we can evaluate cards. And this applies to not only EDH, but all formats. But certainly when we evaluate cards, we're in the frame of EDH, we really have to take into consideration a lot of other things that the other formats don't. So this is more of a guide for EDH. You can join the Squirrel Army by subscribing. Anyway, for today, one of those things that often comes up is efficiency versus upsides, and I talked about that in a recent video here on the channel, or fairly recent at least, late last year, let's say. But anyway, yeah, that's one of those things that a lot of the time, now not all the time, but a lot of the time, the more efficient a spell is, the better off it is being in your deck. The more you have to spend on a spell to get the same sort of an effect as something that is cheaper is often not so worth it. There are a few exceptions, of course, and whatnot, but that is the best way to assess a card, is first off its cost. Is this card 5 mana? Okay, well, can I find a 4 mana spell, a 2 mana spell, or whatever that does the same thing, if not more or better? That's the first way to sort of assess something, its cost. Or saying, is this a sorcery speed or is this instant speed? Like if it has an instant speed or if it has flash, then oftentimes it is a bit better than something that is a sorcery. No, not to say that all sorceries are bad, but, when you can have the flexibility of an instant, it is just so much better. And we talked about how good instants are a while back, saying that you want instant speed removal and all of this. I think everyone knows that you want instant speed removal. I don't think anyone, in the more higher levels of the metagame, plays any sorcery speed removal, because by the time that you might be able to play sorcery speed removal, the game might have already been over. So it's just one of those things that's not worth it, unless you do have a lot of things that allow you to play at flash speed. Then that's a bit different, but still, for the most part, you don't really want those effects, because it just becomes, well, I can't respond with this because it's not instant. So when you say this has flash or it's an instant, it immediately gets another plus. So perhaps, yes, if it is 3, 4, 5, 6 mana or whatever, then you say, oh, well, but it has flash, so it has sort of that immediate effect, and I can respond to things. Then it's well worth it. Certainly things that have an immediate effect on the game and whatnot are a very good thing to have. But not only that, you don't just want to have something that has an immediate effect. There are a few cards that have an immediate effect, and they're not bad, of course. There always are cards that are out there that are well worth playing, and they're a one-off, and they have an immediate effect, and they're one and done. But if you can find cards that happen to also have recurring effects or lasting effects that will continue throughout the rest of the game, then those effects are certainly well worth investing into, because they're going to provide you with more value the longer they stay out on the battlefield. And especially, we talked about scale fairly recently, things that say each opponent, or, even if it is sometimes target opponent, like Carpenter Flowers. I'll take that one as an example because that's pretty darn good no matter what. It does keep scaling to the longer parts of the game for the most part, and even so, for the most part, it will continue to provide you with at least 1 or 2 mana here and there throughout the game. And hey, nearly everyone plays blue in the higher levels of the format. So it's just one of those things that, it won't go too far awry if you do have that sort of thing. So when you're looking at a card and thinking about its effects, I'm not one for stacks myself, but stacks does scale to the rest of the players. You've got to sort of play around it for yourself, which is a huge nuisance, which is one reason why I don't like stacks, because it is like, if they're asymmetrical, then that's amazing. If they say each opponent or whatever, that's fine, because then you don't need to worry about it and you're just like going about your day. But if it says each player, then I'm sort of like, right, well, I've got to play that card last or second to last or whatever it is, or I've got to play it after I've drawn all my cards or whatever, so that, hey, it doesn't affect me, or, or I've got to do all my tutoring or whatever, so that, hey, it doesn't affect me and I don't need to worry about it. Hey, it's all cool. But it's one of those things that punishing your opponents, and trying to tax them out of things isn't bad. It is annoying in some regards, but it's just one of those things that sometimes you have to do because, well, that's very good scaling, because, hey, whenever an opponent doesn't pay for Esper Sentinel, or whenever an opponent doesn't pay for Rhystic Study, or Mystic Remora, or whatever it is, then you're getting more and more value throughout the rest of the game. Whenever an opponent, goes to tutor, Aven Mind Sensor. Oh, they can only search the top, 4 cards, So that's a very good asymmetrical one, and really slows people down. And it's not unfair per se, but it's just one of those things where, it helps you out because you're limiting your opponents, and it's just one of those things. It's difficult to always be doing this, but when you're looking at the game, it's always becoming, stronger and stronger and stronger. So it's always worth being able to keep this in mind and being able to go, yes, I can recognize that these are good and powerful cards, certainly, but is that what I want to do? And that's where I think it comes down to personal taste and personal preferences. Like, if you say, yes, I do recognize that Archpriest of Agumagma or whatever is a really good card, and perhaps I want to play that. That's fine with me, because whenever an opponent tutors, I get to draw a card and gain a life, whatever, that's fine. But, so I'm taxing them for doing the things that I don't want them to be doing. Oh, and I also have, Aven Mind Sensor. So if they do tutor, they're only tutoring the top 4. So they've got to get kind of lucky to tutor something really good. So it's just one of those things. Like, you're not sitting there going, no one else can play the game per se. It's just a little bit more difficult, or you just get a little bit more benefits, or you're playing Deep Gnome Terramancer. Oh, you ramped? Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to ramp also. Or whatever. If you land ramped, I land ramp. Thank you. It's one of those things. You need to be able to keep your opponents in check sometimes, and you don't want to just straight out lose to them. So, and we sort of talked about that in one of the recent videos where I said it's not just about winning; it's about not losing sometimes. If your opponents are doing all of this stuff, you've got to be able to keep up with them somehow. So, keeping the reins on them slightly is well worth the time. But if you don't want to be too unfair, obviously, or too stacksy or whatever, that is your choice. And again, it is your choice to choose to play any of these cards that I'm discussing. I'm just saying that this is one of those things that I'm starting to really notice in my games. It's, whatnot. It's one of those things that the game is getting so hard to manage sometimes because like so many people are going, okay, I'm going to tutor for this, tutor for that, blah blah blah, and now I win or whatever, or at least I have my Soul Ring, and now they're just like getting so far ahead because now they definitely have their Soul Ring, or now they definitely have their artifact or enchantment that really turns on their deck. Okay, now I have Cathar's Crusade and whatnot. So now my deck is really humming and really working. So it's one of those things, or they have their Panharmonicon, or they have their doubling season, or whatever it is. So now their deck's really humming, and it's just like, how can I keep up with this? And like, yes, sure, I could destroy it or whatever. That's one of those things, and I should have removal in my deck for it. We talked about having removal in your deck is one of those things to stop you from losing to something. But again, it's just one of those things that it's so tough to keep up with that, and being able to assess cards and say, yes, these are good cards, but again, is that the way that I want to play? Perhaps not, but perhaps adding some of this other stuff into my deck is well worth my time. But then it becomes tougher and tougher to cut certain things or to keep other certain things in, because it's like, well, what am I going to cut? And it's just one of those things. You do have to make tough cuts. And I think we've made a video a while back about making cuts to your deck, but maybe I should revisit making cuts to your deck, because it's one of those things that always changes. It's very difficult, and it also depends on where you're looking at playing, because again, this advice doesn't always apply to everyone, and some people go, dude, I just want to jam 100 cards into a pile and shuffle up and play, and see what happens. That's fine. Like, I've played that way too. Like, I've, gone through the bulk bin of cards and just pulled out cards until I've got 100 cards or whatever with my lands and whatnot, and then said, right, let's shuffle up and play, Or I've, had a $50 budget, I've had a $100 budget, whatever, etc. deck. So, it's one of those things that it's interesting to sort of see what you can kind of do. And there are some things that you can kind of do with some of those decks, and it is a different, like, assessment process. Well, now I don't have access to every single card. I have access to these cards that are in this pile. So what's the deck that I can make within this pile? Or what's the deck that I can make within this draft, or whatever it is, or sealed, or whatever it is, this pre-release, whatever it is. It's one of those things. And if you don't know your deck, or you don't know what's in your deck, like you're playing Wizard's Tower, or you're just playing some Jumpstart packs together, like, it's one of those things to being like, well, I can't really assess what's in my deck because I can't see what's in my deck, or whatever. I haven't seen what's in my deck. I've just jammed two decks together and, shuffled up and played. So it does depend on what you're playing, again, but we're mostly looking through that lens of EDH. And it's hard to not look at this sort of thing and say, well, maybe I should add some of this stuff because, well, that'll help me out and slow my opponents down. So that's really good for me. It's not negating them playing the game, it's just stopping them or slowing them down a little bit. Okay, instead of, this turn casting 3 spells, well, now they can only cast maybe 2 spells or 1 spell because spells cost 1 more to cast or whatever. Things like that, or 2 more to cast, or they have to pay for, again, Rhystic Study or whatever, or if they don't, I'm drawing cards, I'm getting an advantage. So it doesn't feel great sometimes, and it's one of those things that I don't love, because it's one of those things that I hate having to remember, and it's just like, right, when I'm playing, I want to be able to, just sit there and go, right, well, what am I going to do on my turn? What are my plans going to be while my opponents are doing stuff? I'm paying attention to what they're doing still, but I'm still looking at my hand going, right, well, what's my next step? Where do I go next? Etc. So when you're, like, watching your opponents play, you've got to be paying attention to them, and if they're going to pay the 1 or pay the 3 or whatever it is, etc. Like, or saying, hey, don't forget that you can only tutor this, or you can't tutor, or blah blah blah. You've always got to be enforcing those things that you've set up for your opponents if you do assess them to put them in your deck. So it's just one of those things that you have to remember. But anyway, it is well worth the thought to at least think about them, and that's where I'm at the moment as well. So, guys, you can let me know what you think and whatnot. How do you assess cards? And yeah, hope you've enjoyed, and hope to see you guys in the next one.